I think that if somebody asks you a question when you're up on stage in front of an audience, and your first impulse is to say, well, I don't want to say this, maybe don't say it.
That's Adam Becker, astrophysicist, science journalist, and author of the book More Everything Forever, AI Overlords, Space Empires, and Silicon Valley's Crusade to Control the Fate of Humanity. It's about the plans tech billionaires have for the future and why they don't quite add up.
The kind of AI that they're talking about is obviously not ChatGPT. It's this idea of super intelligent AI, something more intelligent than any human or even all humans combined. This is both ill-defined and not something that anybody knows how to build.
Adam's been keeping tabs on the tech scene in Silicon Valley, and to illustrate the kind of messaging he's seeing, he's just showed us a clip from 2023 with Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, and the co-founder and former chief scientist, Ilya Sutskever. It's a bit hard to present video in the audio realm of podcasting, but let me break it down for you. In it, you see the two men on stage at a conference in Israel, and they've just been asked about solving a problem as complex as the climate crisis and what they see as the potential for AI.
I don't want to say this because climate change is so serious and so hard of a problem, but I think once we have a really powerful superintelligence, addressing climate change will not be particularly difficult for a system like that.
Yeah. We can even explain how. Here's how you solve climate change.
Altman and Sutskever describe a vision of AI where you could simply ask it to tell you how to make a lot of clean energy, how to efficiently capture carbon, and then how to build a factory at a planetary scale to do all that.
If you can do that, you can do a lot of other things too.
Yeah. With one addition that not only you ask it to tell it, you ask it to do it.
For Becker, this is an example of the rhetoric he finds especially dangerous.
The idea of superintelligent AI is a fairy tale, something that comes from science fiction, not science. There's very good scientific reasons to think it's ill-defined and not something that we're anywhere near doing, even if you do come up with a good definition for it. Similarly, a lot of these tech billionaires talk about other technologies that they think are coming very soon, like colonizing space. Elon Musk talks about this a great deal, so does Jeff Bezos. Musk has said that he wants to put 1 million people on Mars by 2050 to serve as a backup for humanity in the event of a disaster here on Earth. A disaster that he never says, by the way, is climate change. He talks about asteroids or nuclear war. And what he seems to miss is that Mars is such a terrible place that you could have both an asteroid impact and a nuclear war here on Earth, and Earth would still be a better place for humanity. And I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm saying that we live in a really great place, and we should do what we can to preserve it.
I'm your host, Manjula Selvarajah. This episode was recorded live at Mars Climate Impact in Toronto last December, where I sat down with Adam Becker. In our conversation, we explore the tension between tech ambition and realistic climate action, and ask whether the stories tech billionaires are selling us are getting in the way of solving big, real-world problems. Plus, we have a question from guest Marcus Extavor, technologist and former chief scientist at XPRIZE. You'll want to hear it. You know, you're not anti-tech.
No.
So what do you think the role is for tech?
I think that technology is part of the solution to almost any problem that humanity faces, certainly a huge part of the solution to the climate crisis. Technology, for a long time, technology was one of the blockers, right? We needed cheap green energy. Now we have that. I guess my take is that technology is great, but technology is never the entire solution, right? You know, certainly there are more green technologies that it would be nice to have that we don't have, But I would say, and I think I'm not alone in this, that at this point, the primary block to humanity handling the climate crisis in a serious way is no longer technology, but is politics.
So you believe the ideas already exist?
I think that most of the ideas that we need in terms of the technology are already out there. I mean, it seems like we need better carbon capture, but we really need to be deploying a lot more green infrastructure than we are in many places around the world. And that's a question of collective action, not a question of technology.
Now, you define some of these ideas as fantasy, and there are things that happen when we pursue fantasy. We're going to get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. But in your book, you describe some of these ambitions of the tech billionaires as dangerous, implausible.
Yeah.
Let's talk through some of them.
Yep.
Why, you've talked about Mars. Why is colonizing Mars not an option?
So this is a weird question to be talking about here at Mars.
Yes. We mean the other Mars.
The other Mars, the big one. This is something I talk about at length in my book, and so I'm tempted to give another flip answer and say I could write a whole book about that. But instead, I'll give a shorter answer and say there are many, many, many reasons. Like I just alluded to, Mars is a really awful place. And there are a lot of reasons we can't live there. The gravity is too low, the radiation is too high, there's no air, and the dirt is made of poison. And there's no good way to solve all of those problems. Elon Musk keeps talking about terraforming, and the closest he's come to giving a real plan for what that would look like to make Mars more Earth-like is to set off a lot of nuclear weapons over both poles of Mars to release all of the gases in the Martian polar ice caps. That won't work. I mean, even if it did work and released all of those gases, there still wouldn't be enough atmospheric pressure. There would still not be any oxygen. You still couldn't have plants there. For all of these reasons and many more besides, Mars is just a terrible place. Also, he talks about having Mars as a backup for humanity. And that's why Musk says he wants to put 1 million people there by 2050. And putting aside the number of rocket launches that would require and the fraction of those rocket launches that would fail, and thus the number of people who would just die for no particular reason, 1 million people is not enough. If you want to have a completely independent, high-tech civilization, you need a larger economic and workforce base than 1 million people. The best estimate is more like 500 million or 1 billion.
Because you have these complicated systems, and someone needs to maintain and run them, and far more complicated systems than we have here.
Yeah. And or at least as complicated as the ones we have here. And I think that this points to a larger issue, which is that these tech billionaires think they're the smartest people in the world because they're the richest people in the world. And therefore, they think that they understand everything, and they don't. And so that means that they consistently oversimplify absolutely everything. They just think that the entire world is simpler than it actually is.
So let me move on to another idea here, singularity. And I'll have to get you to define what singularity is too. But why is the idea of singularity so far-fetched?
The singularity is this idea that there's a point coming soon in the progression of technology where the rate of technological change will happen so quickly, mostly led by AI in some sort of self-reinforcing, improving cycle with AI making itself smarter and smarter and smarter, that it will fundamentally transform human civilization into something possibly not even human, will lead to technology with godlike powers of creation and destruction and transformation. If that all sounds kind of wishy-washy, that's because singularity, like superintelligent AI, is another one of these ideas that has a great deal of currency among the leaders of Silicon Valley that is nonetheless pretty poorly defined. So given that it's poorly defined, it's a little bit hard to pin down, but why is it not plausible? There's a lot of reasons. One of them is that it's this sort of naive tendency to take an existing trend and try to plot it out into the future. But of course, what do you mean by technological progress? The classic example that they give is Moore's Law, which, that's an exponential trend in how many transistors we could cram into one chip. And Ray Kurzweil, who's someone who's talked a lot about the singularity and has maybe been its like most prominent and loudest evangelist, he thinks that Moore's law is some sort of law of nature, but it's not a law of nature. And in fact, there are limits to how many transistors you can cram onto a single chip, and we've reached those limits. Moore's law is, depending on who you ask, either already over or about to be over, because it turns out that silicon chips are made of silicon, and silicon is made of silicon atoms, and those have a particular size, and you can't make the transistor smaller than that. But more fundamentally, I think Kurzweil and these other people, they forget that something like Moore's law is not a law of nature, it's a decision. It was a business decision made by the leaders of the semiconductor industry. So even more generally than that, I think the proponents of this idea of the singularity, they see these exponential trends and think, oh, we're just going to follow those out into the future. But the one thing that we know about exponential trends is that they end. They always end. Especially when you're in a closed system like the Earth.
There's also kind of some naivety about the understanding of human intelligence.
Yeah.
I mean, and that even brain scientists will tell you that they don't even fully understand it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, there is very much this idea that the brain is just like a computer. And so there's this sort of singularity adjacent slogan that you'll hear in the AI industry from people like Ilya Sutskever and others, that scale is all you need, that if you just take current AI systems and make them bigger and more powerful and give them larger training sets, then you will reach something as intelligent as a human and then even more intelligent. This is wrong for all sorts of reasons, but one of the reasons is that the human brain is not a computer. The computational analogy to the human brain is just that, an analogy. And it's just the latest in a series of analogies that people have had for the human brain over the last few centuries. There's been a tendency, understandable and reasonable, to compare the human brain, the most complicated thing we know of in nature, to the most complicated machines that we have at a particular time. So now it's a computer. 50 years ago, it was, a telephone network. 50 years or 75 years before that is a hydraulic system, an analogy that Freud made use of in his psychoanalytic theories. And before that, it was like a clock and stuff like that. And, the brain is more like a computer than it is like a clock, but it's not a computer.
These ideas are supported by some smart people. You're talking about Sam Altman, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and they probably know the science. I would imagine they understand the limitations. Why is it then that they are throwing their energies, attention, and a significant amount of money into these visions of the future?
There's a quote, I don't remember who said this, but it's old, it's like 100 years old, that it's very difficult to get someone to understand something if their paycheck depends on them not understanding it. I think these guys have something even more than a paycheck at stake. These ideas provide them with a sense of purpose and a sense of moral absolution, because if you're trying to save humanity, then anybody who gets in your way is a foe of humanity, not just a foe of, your particular half-baked ideas. And I'm also not convinced that they really know this stuff. Not to be too dismissive of autodidacts or people who have alternative educations, but I think it's only in Silicon Valley where you could get someone who's a college dropout like Sam Altman being seen as a super genius. And I'm going to punch up here unabashedly. What is it exactly that Sam Altman has done? Well, he dropped out of college, had a failed startup, and then was handed control of the most famous and successful startup incubator, Y Combinator, and then took over OpenAI. at a point where they were already well on the way to creating ChatGPT, a product that I would say that there are at least good questions about whether it ever should have been released. And for all of this, we call him a genius. And maybe this doesn't quite answer your question, but like Jeff Bezos is a true believer, right? We know he believes, like for real, that humanity is going to space because he's been saying it since he was in high school, way before, he had all of this money. I think that when you have all of this money and this power, it makes it very hard to hear anybody telling you that you're wrong. And it makes it very easy to believe that you're an expert in everything. These guys have some kind of expertise, but it's not the right kind of expertise to actually evaluate the ideas that they seem to believe in.
It's interesting that Silicon Valley is known or presents itself as a place that believes in contrarian thinking, right? And it's interesting because we are not just talking about these three people or what are the five names that we've mentioned having these ideas. There is a huge following.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when it comes to addressing climate change specifically, what do we lose in the chase of what you've described as fantasies?
There's this idea that these fantasies are a get-out-of-jail-free card. Jeff Bezos doesn't want to think about the carbon footprint of Amazon's shipping network or the rockets at Blue Origin, his space company. And I know I keep picking on the same few people, but that's just because I'm on stage and I'm only thinking of a few people. But these fantasies provide a way of ignoring real problems and the real solutions to those problems by instead saying, as Altman did, oh, we have a solution to the climate crisis. It's to keep doing exactly what we're doing, even though that has a huge carbon footprint. Or to say, as Musk says, oh, Earth is doomed, and so we have to go to Mars, which is better. Or what Bill Gates says, that, oh, the climate crisis isn't that big a deal. We need to pay more attention to things like AI. There's nothing wrong with dreaming an impossible dream. The problem comes when you have so much power and money that you force that impossible dream on the rest of us, heedless of all evidence to the contrary, and that leads to, not just the opportunity cost of putting collective efforts toward something that's not going to happen instead of fixing real problems with real solutions, but also takes those real problems and exacerbates them. What does the pursuit of space colonization or superintelligent AI cost us? Well, those are really carbon-intensive pursuits that, have already led to coal plants restarting and unpermitted natural gas plants. And they also lead to further concentration of wealth and power. And of course, those people think that this is all great. I think that not only is this bad for all of the rest of us, but it's also bad for them. Because what good is $100 billion if civilization collapses?
Do you think that it gives the rest of us these ideas? And they capture so much attention in media and other places, right? Do you think that it gives the rest of us a false sense of comfort?
Yes.
Perhaps stops us from taking the actions that we need to?
Yeah. To get another dig in at these billionaires, they're also deeply unoriginal, right? It's not like they came up with these ideas. The idea of humanity's future being endless colonization of space, and I'm not even going to get into the whole use of that word colonization and the problems there, which is a whole thing. I do talk about that in the book, but that idea is an old idea that's been around since at least mid-20th century science fiction, if not earlier.
So many of these ideas are from science fiction.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
the idea of the brain-computer interface, which I think brain-computer interfaces are interesting.
They are
but the
interesting.
idea of using them for getting to live kind of outside of your body.
Yeah.
Okay, so most of these are kind of rooted in science fiction.
Exactly, and so it gives us a sense of knowing what the future holds. Oh, we're in Toronto, so I'm gonna mention one of the great pieces of Toronto culture, Scott Pilgrim. At one point, somebody asked Scott, "Have you thought about the future?" Meaning his own personal future, and he says, "The future? You mean with jetpacks?" There's this very durable idea of a jetpack, rocket ship, robot future that mostly comes from mid-20th century science fiction that sort of we all have in mind as, oh, that's like either what the future is or what a good future would look like. And it's not true. And in a lot of ways, that's never what science fiction was even trying to depict. Science fiction is a literary genre, and it's often used to examine questions about humanity and about how we are here and now. And if you don't believe me about that, go watch some Star Trek and then tell me that it's actually about space and not about, problems here and now in like really heavy-handed metaphors. And I say this as a huge Star Trek fan. But I think that there is this false hope. It's funny. I'm not going to call out the particular podcast that did this, but I've been going to a lot of podcasts lately, and there was this one podcast where they had started out the podcast by going in and doing like a bunch of, person on the street interviews, asking people like, would you want to move to Mars? And they got a lot of yeses, like an awful lot of people saying, yes, I'd be happy to go to Mars. That sounds like a fun adventure and, the next step for humanity. And then they came to me and said, how could you crush all of these people's dreams? Which is a hell of a guilt
You're like,
trip.
happy to.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, I am happy to do it. I think it's important to point out where people have false hope, right? This idea that, oh, well, if we get things wrong here, we can go somewhere else. It's not an option. And I think that if I had been able to do those interviews myself with the people on the street, I would have asked them, oh, okay, so how would you feel about moving to the South Pole in the Arctic night for, a full season, like, 7-ish months? Because they are always looking for people to do that, and they often have trouble finding people to do it. And it is, by every single measure, much, 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 much easier to live there for that period of time than it is to live on Mars. You can't even get to Mars in that period of time. And there's lots of other places like that, the top of Mount Everest, the bottom of the ocean.
It's almost like we buy into the pitch, but we don't really understand the reality of it. Yeah. And therefore, it's easy to just go on and live our lives the way that we do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I was watching that clip that you showed with Sam Altman and Ilya Sutskever, who is from the University of Toronto. Actually, he received an honorary degree and spoke at University of Toronto this year. They talk about this superintelligence that is going to come up with a solution for climate change. They present it as a savior. Meanwhile, if you talk to most of the people in this room, pretty much everyone in this room will say they understand the carbon footprint of AI and understand the impact that it's going to have on the environment. Yeah. But I really don't see this as like it's a savior, it's evil. Like, it's not black and white. Where do you think the possibilities are for AI, where AI can genuinely help without tipping into fantasy?
So I think that, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but I really think that one of the problems here is a question of definitions. AI is a term that doesn't mean what it used to, right? It's come to be a very, very broad term. If you went back in time 30 years and went and talked to me when I was a kid and said, hey, I've got this little device here, and it's got an AI on it, and I can talk to that AI, I would be very disappointed with the reality of it, because 30 years ago, AI meant something like Commander Data from Star Trek, right? Or HAL from 2001. Mm-hmm. That's not what we have. Not the best example. No, not the best example, but still, it's not what we have. Yeah. And now we use AI to cover a huge swath of technologies. Everything from large language models to what we used to call machine learning. And so I guess my cop-out answer to your very good question is it depends on what you mean by AI. Like, are there places for deep learning systems to identify patterns that would be hard for humans to identify without that kind of assistance, that could be used to find greater energy efficiencies in various industries? Sure, absolutely. Is a souped up LLM going to save the world? No.
Now, you said that this is the one decade that we can't afford to waste. When it comes to climate action, what is the most important shift in mindset that you'd want innovators, investors, and policymakers to make right now?
Right now, and maybe it's because it's so early in the morning for me and I'm feeling a little cranky.
Let's hear it.
Yeah.
Really? Because that's what your book sounded like.
Yeah, well, I wrote a lot of that early in the morning, too. And I tried to make the book fun.
No, it
please.
was. I'm picking on you.
Yes, of course. I'd like to think it's fun, but I'm biased. I think that what I'd like to get across is that the leaders of the American tech industry, the leaders of what we broadly call Silicon Valley or big tech, the tech oligarchs, are not your friends. And you can't trust them, and you have to fight them explicitly. And it would be nice if we could not do that and just either work with them or, at least try to ignore them. But I really think that at the very least, the events of the last year have made it very clear that's not an option. And if we're going to actually get real climate action and address the climate crisis in the way that we need to, then we actually have to fight them.
Jokes about you being cranky aside, it's a fabulous book. It's actually, I would say, if not my top read, it's one of my top reads of the year. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
It is an intense read. You've done a lot of research here. There is this one line that you have here that's by, you quote writing by Carl Sagan, and I'll just say something about Carl Sagan. I know you're a huge fan of his. Carl Sagan was at my graduation. I'm aging myself here. Queen's University. Any Queen's University fans here? Woo! Believe it or not, he got an honorary degree. I don't think you got to meet Carl Sagan. Let me tell you, my parents and my brothers were more excited that he was there. There are actually more photos of him than of me after I'd gone through this really difficult degree. So
that's awesome.
So that aside, I wanted you to read this part of the book.
Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand.
That was my first conversation with Adam Becker on the stage at Mars Climate Impact. A few weeks later, right before the new year, my producer Ellie and I jumped on a video call with Adam to clear up a few things and hear what's changed since he wrote the book. Adam, hello.
Hi.
It's good to chat again.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. This is fun.
How's the book tour going?
Well, I'm home finally for a while. I'm not going to hit the road again for a little bit, which is nice because I was traveling. I mean, when I last saw you, that was actually my last stop for a while.
Your trip into Toronto.
Yeah.
And is the reaction changing? Is it a lot more hate mail, a little hate mail? Where are things standing now?
I don't actually get that much hate mail, which I'm pretty happy about.
Well, let's change that today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's what Canada's known for, right? Hate mail.
Absolutely. But we apologize after. How dare you? Of course we apologize after. So we have a question for you from Marcus Extavor. He's a scientist and a technologist that uses AI to uncover patterns in environmental data. Okay. He's a strategic partner at ODE and former chief scientist at X Prize Foundation. Okay. So here's the question.
Hi, this is Marcus Extavor. My question is whether it's valuable or even possible to separate critiques of some of these tech billionaires from critiques of the individuals actually doing the work every day, because it's not them, and the types of problems and technologies they are developing. I think a lot of these individuals, scientists, engineers, programmers, designers, product developers, and skilled professionals like this would be surprised to hear that they are spending their careers working on heartless, baseless, and foolish obsessions, as you mentioned. So how should we think about these folks that really do think they are trying to use technology to reduce poverty, to fight climate change, to understand space and space exploration, and yes, to build artificial intelligence. How should we think about those individuals, and how do you think about them in light of the critiques you've made about the tech bosses? Thank you.
That's a great question. Look, there's a tendency to think that the future of technology is on rails, that we know what the future holds, that, there's just some technology that is next. You'll hear a lot of the tech billionaires talk this way. There is this idea that, this is just where technology is going. Talking about technology as a vast, impersonal force, when the fact is that we get to make decisions about where technology goes and what kinds of technologies are developed. And that's something that the leaders of the tech industry have taken upon themselves and have decided that they're going to do without, input from the rest of us or really much regard for what would be good for the world. Now, that's not to say that these companies don't do valuable things sometimes, right? It's good to send up satellites into space to explore space. That was a particularly interesting choice of words, partly because I'm an astrophysicist by training, but also most of the satellites that SpaceX sends up are not about exploring space. They're about building a giant, unsustainable telecommunications constellation that could very well lead to a kind of ecological disaster in low Earth orbit called Kessler syndrome. And you can build something that is in and of itself good, but if you build it as part of a larger project being created by a company that is devoted to social ills, that can take what you've built and twist it into a form that takes it beyond what you had in mind. So I think that actually the rank and file workers at these tech companies need to take a hard look at what they're doing. And I would really like to see them unionize, because I do know that a lot of them don't hold the political views of the tech billionaires that they work for. And it would be nice to see them remind their bosses that they, the bosses, would be nowhere without the hard work and efforts of, workers at these companies. And the best way to do that is to unionize.
I do think it can be really hard once you're someone who's in that system to kind of walk away from your ownership or walk away from a pretty highly compensated role that you may have to take on these other things. You know what I mean, Adam? I'm just being realistic.
Totally. I mean, look, I think, it is always going to be harder to act against your own personal self-interest. But the fact is that they can afford it. And so that's, to me, the case for,
the imperative.
Not just the imperative that they have, but the imperative that the rest of us have to regulate them. I live here in the US, and here they have gone a long way toward just capturing the entire government apparatus of the country. Now they have a lot of political power, but they also have power to shape the discourse. And some of that power comes from their ownership of various, social media platforms and increasingly news platforms.
So they have a handle on the places where we have discourse.
Right, exactly. And also what it is that we talk about, right? Ultimately we want to talk, if we want to have a healthy democracy, we need to talk about what the future is going to be like and where we're going to try to take our country and our civilization and our species. And they are injecting huge amounts of impossible bullshit into that conversation. And that makes it difficult to talk about the real stuff that actually matters. We need to be very clear about the lies that they're telling and about the things that they're saying that are not true. And I think going after their visions of the future is an important part of draining their power.
Now, you spoke about this deeper embrace between these tech bosses and the current U.S. administration. Yes. What concerns you the most? Because it's also shifted since you wrote the book.
Yeah, that's right. Because I wrote the book before the election. And so before the election, I felt like I was writing a warning. And now it feels like I am just describing what's already come to pass in a lot of ways, and warning about where they want to take it. So what's the most disturbing thing about it to me? Probably the flagrant contempt for democracy and democratic accountability. they lined up behind Trump because they want the government to leave them alone. And they saw Trump as a vehicle to just buying their way out of any possibility of regulation or democratic accountability for their actions. That's a recipe for, a serious power struggle between the ultra wealthy and the rest of us. And, that's not something. There are, I think, people out there who really like that idea, who are like, yeah, we got to go after these guys. I'm like, we do have to go after them, but I don't like that. I don't, that's not the direction I wanted us to go in. I wanted us all to work together to try to make the world a better place. And now, in order to do that, we're going to have to go after these guys and try to wrench their power away from them because we don't have another option.
Now, you and I didn't have the time to get into this on stage. You were talking about superintelligence. You said there's very good scientific reasons to think that it is ill-defined and not something that we're anywhere near doing.
Yeah.
But what are those reasons?
Well, the idea of intelligence is frankly hopelessly ill-defined. The history of intelligence testing is tied up with eugenics and various kinds of pseudoscience that were popular around the turn of the 20th century. And if you look at the definition of intelligence that's used by some AI researchers, like there was this famous paper called Sparks of AGI a couple years back, talking about behavior that they were seeing in, I think it was GPT-3, maybe GPT-4. I hesitate to use the word behavior for a large language model. In any event, definition of general intelligence used in that paper came straight out of eugenics. And that paper is from like 2 years ago. The other thing is, I think that fundamentally the definition of AGI, insofar as it has a definition, is like those robots from science fiction. It's not going to happen. The abilities of the human brain and humans are still way, way beyond anything we can get computers to do. If you want to see a good example of that, think about the amount of text. Just GPT-2, not a particularly good large language model, like one of the early ones, had to ingest. Just that model had to ingest many, many thousands, I think it was maybe even millions of times more text than any human could read in a single lifetime. And that was to do a pretty bad job of producing text. Compare that to a human baby. A human baby encounters large amounts of language, but nothing close to the scale that GPT-2 ingested, much less GPT-3 or 4 or 5. And yet, babies go from not being able to speak any particular language to sometimes being fluent in more than one language over the course of just a few years. And so that's already an indication that, we're not actually particularly close. We are reaching the limits of GPU architecture. We're reaching the limits of LLM architecture. So what's needed is like a fundamentally different approach. Now, of course, it is possible that tomorrow someone will invent a fundamentally different approach that suddenly gets us to the doorstep of this. But I wouldn't bet on that because it seems like the kind of architecture of these computers as a whole, like modern computers, is just too wildly different from what happens within the human brain and the human body. When you think about the breakthrough that led to LLMs, right, the transformer architecture, the main thing there was making it easier for it to ingest large amounts of data quickly. That's what the breakthrough was. And so what this led to was something that was better at predicting the next word or pixel in a sequence. But that is not enough. Just predicting the next thing in a sequence like that is simply not enough to do what humans do because it lacks so much context about the world around us. And it's not enough to say, okay, well, then we're just going to put it in a robot body and hook it up to cameras and stuff, because you need it to sort of grow in concert with its interactions with the world. Otherwise, you're not going to end up with something that has any ability to really understand what the world around it is. This is not something that we're anywhere close to having. And if you take a look at, say, Rodney Brooks, AI scientist, cognitive scientist, expert, professor at MIT, he has said And he's right, if you just look at the history, that the history of AI is AI booms followed by AI winters. And he thinks, and he's not alone in this, that we are on the verge of another AI winter, if not a full-blown tech winter. And he said it's going to be cold.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, I keep thinking about the AI bubble. At this point, basically, the only real justification for the valuations of the companies investing in AI and creating AI would be if these myths about a super intelligent godlike AI were true. And a bubble does less harm the earlier it pops. And so, like, if the AI bubble popped right now, that would cause, some real economic consequences that would be very unpleasant for a lot of people, possibly including me. But it's only going to get worse. So where I'm hoping we go from here is more and more people realize that it's a bubble. And we're starting to see signs of that. We're also starting to see signs of like a public backlash against AI slop. We're seeing signs of a real public backlash against billionaires, massive
and data centers,
massive popular support for increasing taxes on the ultra wealthy here in the US. Even support for limiting, like capping the amount of wealth that one person can amass, which is something I talk about in my book. And so it's very nice to see that bearing out in the polling data. But the silver lining to the horrible political news in this country is people are waking up to the fact that, the ultra wealthy do not have their best interest in mind and are warping reality around them to suit their needs through the power of their concentrated wealth. So where do we go from here? I think we've got to take some power back from these people in the form of organized labor, in the form of organizing to win elections, even in the face of like fascist headwinds here in the US. And I think we got to regulate the tech industry. And I'm seeing like a popular groundswell of support for all of these things.
Lots to watch for, Adam.
Yeah.
Adam, thank you. We should let you get back to the rest of your day and your book tour. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is fun. Thanks for having me.
Solve for X is brought to you by Mars. This episode was produced by Ellen Payne-Smith, Laura Torvey, Sona McBool, and Sarah Liss are the associate producers. Max Swain composed the theme song and all the music in this episode. Gab Harpel is our mix engineer. Jason McBride is our senior editor. Catherine Hayward is our executive producer. I'm your host, Manjula Selvarajah. Rate, subscribe, or leave a review. We read them all.
Solve for X is brought to you by Mars, North America's largest urban innovation hub, and a registered charity. Mars supports startups and accelerates the adoption of high-impact solutions to some of the world's biggest challenges. For more information, visit marsdd.com. And we want to hear from you. Drop us a line to share your ideas, questions, and feedback. What innovations are you curious about? Email us at media@marsdd.com.